Welcome to Ordinary Teachers and Students, where we get to hear teachers and students tell us their extraordinary stories. My hope is that through this podcast, ordinary teachers from around the world can relate to the stories they hear and get some timely suggestions and ideas. My name is Alan Cheng, and I'm a life coach as well as a university lecturer. My vision is to make life coaching a part of every school. Today, I'm delighted to invite Robin Hedley onto our podcast. Robin is the assistant head of the English department at a secondary school in Hong Kong. I first met Robin in a professional development session that I held at his school, and I've since gotten to know him better through my life coaching. I must say that I've been really impressed with his leadership qualities and how forward-thinking he is. Let's learn more about Robin's journey to Hong Kong and teaching. Welcome, Robin.
Hello.
Anything to add to that intro?
I think you've summarized me pretty well. Thanks, Alan.
If we start with maybe what got you into teaching in the first place, because I know that your degree wasn't in teaching, right?
Yeah, so when I was at university in the UK, I saw a program called Oxbridge Summer Camps Abroad, which sent a bunch of students from my university and Oxford as well to Japan, Beijing, and Hong Kong. And I signed up, got interviewed, and got onto it. And so that was my first opportunity to have actual classroom experience, where I was sent across to Hong Kong, where I got.
Right.
And I did teaching there and really enjoyed it. And then in the summer of my second year at university, I went back on the same program, and then one of the schools that I taught at asked if I would consider applying for a full-time job, and then I did apply and got in. And so that's pretty much the rest is history. After that,
Was it like a flyer on the wall or some kind of advertisement that you saw?
Some of my friends had found it and said that they were all applying, and that we should all try and apply together, and we can all go to Asia and teach together. It'll be great fun. And so we all applied, and only two of us got in, and then away I went.
But had you ever thought you would become a teacher? Like, I mean, at the time, like obviously your degree wasn't education. And you seemed like you did it mostly because your friends were doing it too, right? Was it the
Yeah,
Asia part that attracted you or the teaching part?
I think at the time it was definitely the Asia part that attracted me. I'd never been to Asia. It was a great opportunity. I was still quite young, and like, it was only my first year at uni. I think I was applying for the program after only one term at university. So I didn't have a lot of experience to decide I know what I'm doing for the rest of my life already or anything like that. But I think in hindsight, teaching has been something in my history.
Okay.
My parents rent out a few of the spare bedrooms in our house to language assistants and teaching assistants at some of the schools in the surrounding area. And some of them are coming basically to improve their English. And even though I would be 10 years old or 13, I mean, for many years we did this. I was kind of the de facto English teacher for them, because if they had questions, I was there and we were hanging out, playing games, that kind of thing. And so for a long time, I spent a lot of time with foreign language learners. And so now in Hong Kong as an English teacher, it comes very naturally to me when I can see that they're trying to communicate something. I just know what they're trying to say, even if they only get out one or two of the words, because I have many years of trying to understand foreign language learners and what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Take me to the part where like it's the final year of your degree program and you have an offer or you mentioned just now that a school said, oh, come, do you want to apply, right? What went through your mind there? Like, obviously, like I might keep emphasizing, oh, teaching didn't seem to be the path for you, right?
Well, I had really enjoyed the summer camps, and so
Yeah.
teaching is definitely an option. It was funny because I had been thinking maybe I would move to Japan for a bit of time. I was interested in moving to Asia to get some more international experience and exposure. But I had looked at basically the equivalent of the NET scheme, Native English Teacher Scheme in Hong Kong and
Mm,
Japan,
mm, mm,
which at
mm,
the time
mm.
was called the JET scheme.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and said, there's no way I'm qualified to get into that, so there's no point applying. And then a school in Hong Kong basically recruited or helped me to get onto the
Mm,
same program in Hong Kong. And so it kind of seemed like a door that was opening that
yeah.
wouldn't otherwise open to me.
Mm. And do you want to tell us a bit more about what's happened since then? And so you've stayed in teaching. How many years have you been teaching for now?
Yeah, I've been at this school for 4.5 years,
Mm,
and
mm,
I've been at the same school. So it's the same school that recruited me or asked if I was interested. I started there, yeah, 4.5 years ago, and I did 2 years through all of COVID, and
oh
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
very interesting. And then I decided to do a PGCE. So I did
Yeah.
that one in my third year. And after my PGCE, they promoted me to deputy head of department.
Mm,
And now I'm a year and a bit into doing that and trying to make the department more effective, more
mm,
enjoyable, more functional,
mm.
maybe more modern as well and progressive.
Yeah. Was it what you expected? Like again, just contrasting when you first took that plane to Hong Kong, thinking about,
Mhm.
oh, what am I getting myself into, to now, like looking back on in terms of what's happened. Was it what you expected?
I think I was surprised initially, as I said before, that I was in contact with a lot of teaching assistants and language assistants growing up, and I had
Mm,
asked of them, "What do you think I'll expect from this full-time job
mm,
in
mm,
leadership?" And they said, "Oh, well, they know that you have no very limited teaching experience, so there's no
mm.
way that you'll end up managing a full class. You'll just be a teaching assistant, basically." And I turn up on day one, and they say, "You'll have two full English classes, and you'll teach oral for all of Form 1." And I go, well, okay then. That's where we go from here. So
Yeah.
it was a lot to begin with. It was I had to learn very quickly and try my best to
Mm,
think about how what I was doing could be more effective,
mm,
could be effective full stop.
mm.
It was a little bit of making things up on the fly, but
Yeah,
it
I can
uh,
imagine.
I think it was I look back at it now and I think, wow, I'm a much better teacher now.
Yeah,
Praise the
yeah.
Lord. But at the time, I still think I gave a good effort to do a good job.
Sure. Okay. And so normally we move on to kind of the part where we kind of take a deeper dive into a topic of your choice. So what
Mhm.
what did you want to talk about?
I really like the idea of the relationship between fun or enjoyment and language learning in particular. I think it applies to
Mm, mm,
all learning, but in
mm, mm, mm.
particular to language learning. I think that because language learning, and obviously I'm an English teacher here in Hong
Yeah.
Kong,
Mm,
I
mm,
think because language learning it's a skill, not just a set of facts. And
mm,
if you want a student to write more proactively, you want them to
mm,
use more vocabulary, you want them to try complex sentence structures
mm.
in their speaking or in their writing, then they have to want to do that because you
Yeah.
can write a very basic, poorly worded essay that answers a question and gets a bad mark if that's all you're trying to achieve. But if you
Mm.
enjoy the subject, then you will just go that little extra mile to look for a synonym for a word that you do know, and then you've
Yeah.
learnt a new word, to look for a way of translating a particular sentence structure into English or any
Mm,
other for that matter, to really communicate what you're actually trying to say. And I think that if language teachers don't recognize that um, language learning needs to be enjoyable, then
mm.
there'll be much more limited results.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest barrier then to injecting fun into the classroom for language teachers?
Probably depends on the context. I think within a more traditional context, they focus quite heavily on a set curriculum, which is
Mm,
not necessarily a bad thing in its entirety, but when you're so focused on here are all the grammatical structures that I need to have covered this year, and if it's
mm,
too, let's say, ambitious,
mm,
and you forget that a student's never going to use those structures unless they want to use them, You're not
Right.
going to be stuck behind them in the exam saying, remember to use a participle phrase here or anything like that. They have to naturally want to use that structure or just come up with it themselves. And I think when the curriculum gets too crammed, it becomes a
Mm,
set of very classroom-based, teacher-centered lessons
mm, mm.
are not enjoyable for students. And so I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's probably one of the biggest barriers is overburdened curricula and being a bit too focused on these are the things we need to teach rather than make the language enjoyable in itself.
Yeah, sure, sure. Okay. What do you do to try to get that fun into your own classroom then? Or even curriculum, given that you're now assistant head of your department, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I have done since being the assistant head is I said that we need more school trips in the English
Mm,
department,
mm,
something
mm,
that takes the students outside of the classroom. And so now we do trips for actually all of the year groups, which is really great.
mm,
Do more project-based learning as well. So each
mm.
of, particularly the junior forms, but the senior forms this year have started to have sets of projects that they do over several weeks. And I kind of see these as first of all, enjoyable. And second of all, they are like a journey. And the end of the journey is a particular output that you've asked the students to make, like a
Mm,
video or a
mm,
presentation or something like
mm.
that. And en route to that output, they have to pass things that require them to use English. They
Yep.
have to read certain articles, they have to listen to things, watch videos, interview people. And so they're using the language to get to the end of their project
Mm,
and to produce whatever we've asked them to do. And because it's less focused around here's a set of questions,
mm,
answer them in 10 minutes, which would be more like an exam setting, the
mm,
students enjoy it and they don't think about it as being work or as
mm.
being a challenge. And so they are. I've been amazed at how much extra effort they go into these things. They find if we've asked them to make videos, they find costumes, they dress up, they
Yeah,
make
yeah.
scripts, they go a second time to the place that we have taken them on the school trip. We
Mm, mm,
went to
mm.
Hong Kong Wetland Park, and some of my students went back the week after because they said the weather wasn't good enough, so they wanted to film in better weather. And
Wow.
it's really interesting that you create that environment for them to be able to go an extra mile and do in
Yep.
something that's enjoyable. And more often than not, the students take it.
Mm, mm. And it seems like they really took on the ownership of the projects, right? So they really cared
Yeah.
about it, and that's why they probably went back again to take better videos or photos. Anything
Mhm.
else that you do? So you mentioned school trips, you mentioned projects. Anything else that your school does to try to get a bit more fun into the English learning?
I think one other thing that we've done is also to try and reduce some of the things that are so boring. And so,
Mm, 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 mm,
in particular, more traditional language learning contexts, particularly I'd say in a Chinese context,
mm.
focus on rote learning. I
Yep.
think because a lot of them will use rote learning to learn Chinese,
Mm, mm,
but it's not a particularly effective way of learning English.
mm, mm,
And
mm.
so we have taken out as much rote learning as we can
Yep.
because it encourages students to put a single sentence into their short-term memory, throw it on a piece of paper, and then forget it the next day,
Yep.
which isn't useful in the long-term development of their language. And
Mm,
so
mm.
we have also taken out some of those things which are really quite mundane and don't have very great reward for that investment.
Yeah. Things like dictations, possibly.
Dictations, actually, I think unseen dictations are still very valuable.
Okay.
You
Yep.
don't give the dictation passage to students beforehand because at the end of the day, the students in Hong Kong, they still have to sit the DSE, and one of the papers is the
Mm,
listening paper. But
mm.
I can guarantee that even if I have practically taught the whole dictionary, there will be a word that the student doesn't know how to and that or that they've not heard before. Either they forget it on the day, or I just can't cover the whole English language in even the 12 years they learn like English.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, what do I need them to be able to do on the day? I need them to be able to hear a word that they've not heard before and still be
Mm,
able to speak correctly, which is difficult in English because there are a lot of exceptions to
absolutely.
phonetic
Yeah.
spelling rules. But I would say that it is a skill that can be developed and can be developed to a point that you can still do quite well in the listening paper from that. And so unseen dictations, I think, are still quite valuable because they
Mm,
focus on converting what you listen to into an attempt at spelling a word correctly
mm,
and over time spelling the word correctly. Scene dictations, I don't think are particularly valuable. That's basically
mm,
rote learning, and they then just don't listen to the person reading out the dictation. They've done their homework at home, they've learned all of the words,
mm.
and then don't listen to the order and they write it all down. And so that would be less effective. And so we've taken out scene dictations and
Sure,
put in
sure, sure.
unseen dictations instead.
How do you run the unseen dictation? So obviously I kind of get the concept, but um, imagine you're talking to a teacher who's never done anything beyond the scene dictation. Like, what would be
Mhm.
the steps to get them to try out an unseen dictation?
So you have to somewhat know your students and their ability to know how difficult to make it, but
Mm,
they would generally, at the start of every single lesson, they have an
mm.
unseen dictation book, and I read one sentence and they all try and write it down.
Oh,
And then
okay.
we do
Mm,
the
mm,
sentence together, and then I might repeat some of those words over time if they're consistent mistakes for
mm.
students. But that's a general daily practice. And then if you want
Yep.
to do it on a larger scale for a test, you just have a longer passage that they've not seen before.
Mm,
And
mm,
it's
mm.
pretty much exactly the same as doing your scene dictations, except you've not told the students exactly what they need to revise beforehand.
Yep.
You've given
Yep.
them an idea, you might have given them some of the vocabulary, but you won't
Mm,
give them the whole passage in its entirety.
yep. Yep. Do you try to inject a bit of fun in the daily unseen dictations? So I'm just thinking, what sentences do you read aloud? Do you just look around the classroom, or do you have something planned?
If we are working on a unit from their textbook, then I might take some of the sentences from their textbook, which might not be
Okay.
quite interesting. If I'm teaching a lesson on, say, Narnia, and we're
Mm,
going to be analyzing a couple of sentences within that book, then
okay.
I might do the dictation on those sentences. And
Mm,
then once we have done the dictation, then the sentences are already on the board, and then we can
mm,
talk about them for the rest of the lesson. So it's also a
mm,
lead in
mm. It
for
is,
the
yeah.
lesson as well.
Yeah, sure, sure,
So
sure.
it's quite flexible. It serves a lot of purposes. It's usable in different ways, really.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely sounds like a really good idea. I'm going to give you a little bit of challenge here. So, out of all the things that, um, like within English language teaching, that I think is the most boring part is definitely teaching grammar. I'm just
Mm.
wondering how you and your teachers at your school approach it, like in terms of trying to make it fun, or do you try to make it fun, or just tell them, this is the grammar that you have to learn. It's not going to be fun, but you're just going to have to learn it. Yeah. So how do you approach that?
That certainly is a challenge. Grammar learning is never really that enjoyable.
Mm,
It's quite difficult to make it that much fun. I would say try to make it in chunks.
mm,
So don't do an entire 2 hour lesson on grammar because
mm, mm,
the students can't pay attention for that long and they won't remember it the next day. If you can
mm,
just teach, often in the textbooks, the grammar unit will be broken down into subsections. Just teach a section a day or something
mm,
like that. Um, I also think that on the whole, what you want is for your students to really pick it up quite naturally and be able to use it. And so if you can
mm,
take grammar from things that they are reading, and so if you give them an
mm,
article and pull out the participle phrase or the relative
mm,
clause
mm, mm,
from what they've just read, and they can see it in context, they can see how it was used. I think it can make it a little bit more relevant to them and more
yeah,
realistic. When it's
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
all about the textbook, more often than not, I see students not able to connect it with when they should really be able to use it. Even if
mm,
they've learned the rules of you should use present perfect when you're talking
mm,
about something that happened in the past and is still
yeah,
true now, they still won't use present perfect in their
mm,
writing. They
mm,
have not seen it used in a type of context that is somewhat related to what they now want to use. And they
yep,
go, oh no, it was a present perfect last time. And then they put a have or a had.
mm, mm,
And so I think that to try to avoid grammar teaching only being out of a textbook would be one recommendation, and to
Yeah.
try to use what they are reading in the context that they have in order to make grammar seem more everywhere to them.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I was just thinking while you're speaking that when you are able to link it to those projects that you do, and like you said, pull out grammar structures from what they're reading or what maybe a video that they're watching, I think it's so much more relevant and that like there's more context to it rather than, oh, this is the grammar book, this is the chapter that we're doing, and we're gonna have to learn this regardless of the context. And normally in the grammar book, they just give like random sentences or examples of the
Mhm.
grammar
Yeah.
and trying to loosely tie it into what students might be interested in, right? Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I actually had a question that I wanted to ask you. Probably should have started with this question, but I wonder what your definition as a teacher is of fun or enjoyable, like an enjoyable, fun lesson.
I must say, I don't think that the answer should come from a teacher. It should come from a student. If the
Yeah.
student smiles or laughs or
Mm, mm,
likes it, then definition given, really.
mm,
And so
mm,
when you're trying to make something fun, try and think from a student's perspective, what are they actually
mm,
going to enjoy?
mm, mm,
Um, Often it can be as simple as just taking something out of a very classroom mundane context.
mm,
It could be doing something different that can already in
mm,
itself
mm,
be
mm.
fun, just
Yeah.
because it's not usual and you're not used to it, and things that we do all the time can be a bit boring. And so I think a definition of fun, I struggle to come up with exactly, but ultimately, if the student enjoys it, they smile and they go, I like this subject more after having
Mm.
done it, then that's everything I would want to call fun
Yeah,
in a class.
yeah. And do you feel it's realistic to be able to achieve that every single day? Because I'm again trying to think from a perspective of a teacher who's like trying to shift maybe from a more traditional type of teaching to what you've been suggesting, right? They'll be like, oh, it seems like a lot of work. Seems like I have to completely revamp what I'm doing right now.
Um, well, a couple of things. I think one is that ultimately we do it for the students, and so if it is going to be
Mm,
better for them, then the work is
mm,
worth putting in.
mm.
Um, in terms of do you have to revamp everything? Well, it depends on how not fun you currently are as a teacher, to be honest. But I think that there are simple ways, perhaps try and include a bit more humor sometimes in your lessons
Mm,
already.
mm,
Make, if you are just teaching a relatively normal grammar lesson, for example, use example sentences. We always have example sentences, but
mm,
choose ones that are funny or ones that
mm,
use
mm, mm,
their favorite K-pop star or something like
mm,
that. Just
mm.
anything that makes it a little bit more interesting than just the cat is grey, because that's not an interesting sentence. And to the students who don't have cats, it's also not interesting either. Um, so do I think it takes a full revamp? Well, I do think that if you as an educator think that it should be very focused around teacher delivering and students receiving and
Mm,
is your constant way of teaching, then I would say yes, it will take a revamp, because I don't think that that's a particularly enjoyable and in the long run really effective way of teaching everything.
mm.
Sometimes you need a bit of teacher talk, but sometimes you don't need teacher talk, and the students need to be trying something out themselves. And um, yeah, I think I've seen a lot of teachers in a Hong Kong context who focus more on I need to say more as a teacher, and the
Mm,
students need to work harder in taking notes and then do their
mm.
work at home. But it doesn't actually achieve that much more, and it can be quite inefficient sometimes. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I would say open yourself up to the person who is in this style of teaching. Open yourself up to changing
Mm,
your educational philosophy a bit less centered around the teacher and more centered around the students discovering and
yeah,
doing.
yeah, yeah. So many really good points there. Thanks, Robin.
And one more
Anything
thing,
else?
sorry,
Yeah,
if I
yeah, go
may,
for it. Yeah.
yeah, you're about to say anything else. Yeah, one more thing that I would add is actually I find that if for projects, for example,
Mm,
they take a while to set up. They take a lot of thought as a teacher to get them going. But once
mm,
they are going, the students are almost entirely autonomous. And so
mm, mm,
you have
mm,
set up the foundation work, given them a goal, and then you let them run for it. And
mm,
so lessons can be remarkably simple once you've actually
mm.
done
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
it can take a lot of time as a teacher to prepare it outside of the lesson. But in the lesson, you deliver what the goal is, you tell them how to get there, or even you don't give them too much of an idea of how to get there. And
Yep.
then you just support them throughout the lesson. You walk around the classroom and you say, "How's it going? What are you thinking
Mm,
about at the moment?" And
mm,
you challenge everything that they're doing. And so, um, actually, as a lesson goes, it's not too difficult. And if you're already spending a lot
yep.
of time preparing your lessons for a grammar lesson, well, this is just preparing for a project. And then the actual lesson itself is not
Mm,
as hard, I would
yeah.
say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, that's such a good point because I think it's about the teacher letting go of control in the classroom, right? Being willing to let go of control, giving students that autonomy. And once students
Mhm.
feel that, oh, I have a sense of autonomy in the classroom, that's when
Yeah.
they feel like, okay, I want to learn more about this subject. I want to do better in this subject. Really good point.
Yeah.
And my question just now was simply, did you have anything else to add to what we have said that we haven't already talked about? So I wonder,
I think I just
yeah,
added
that
it.
was it. Right. So are we ready to move on to the quick fire questions?
Sure.
How would your students describe you? Apart from fun, you're not allowed to talk about the fun today. We've already said a lot.
Well, ironically, I think when I first started in the school, they would have probably described me. Actually, I had a student the other day who was one of my students from my first class, and she described
Mm.
me as cool, but I think that was almost a mistranslation of
Ah,
cold, because
yeah.
when I first started in the school, it was um, I did not know what the cultural or appropriate way to be
Mm,
around a student was in Hong Kong. In the
mm,
UK, there's a quite a significant divide between teacher and student
yeah.
in relation. In Hong Kong, it's much closer. You're
Mm,
almost verging on friendship sometimes.
mm, mm, mm,
And that was very foreign to me. And
mm,
so I came in
mm,
and basically shut down any attempts students made to
mm,
be fun with me or
mm,
anything
mm,
like that.
mm, mm,
And
mm.
they received that as, okay, we're not going to
Being
have fun with
cold.
this teacher.
Mm,
And it took a few years for me to work out where the line was between still
mm,
being accepted as a teacher, but
mm, mm.
still being able to have fun with them.
Yeah, sure, sure. So is your answer cold or a
Not
bit more fun
anymore,
now?
I'd say.
Not
I think
anymore.
now probably more personable or
Okay,
even humorous as well.
sure, sure. Do you have any favorite go-to activities in your classroom?
I like things that get students moving. So if you have
Mm,
something that gets them running to the whiteboard and underlining something
mm,
thought,
mm,
or everyone thinks of an answer and they all have to run up and write it on the whiteboard. I have one classroom that I use where there are whiteboards all around the classroom on the
mm,
walls.
mm, mm,
So
mm.
I can send the whole class to separate whiteboards around the room, and that's really
That's so
effective as well.
cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. How about online tools? Any online tools or resources that you kind of like using?
Yeah, I have it's an American program. It's called Read Theory, and
Okay.
you may have heard of it, but it's basically a reading comprehension website that is computer based, meaning that it gives a reading comprehension to students. If they get
Mm.
all the questions right, then the next one that it gives them is harder. If they
Ah,
get them all,
yeah, yeah.
then the
Mm.
next one is easier. If they
Mm.
get between some bracket of right and wrong, then they
Yeah.
get much similar difficulty the next time. And it's a really quick way for students to read a lot, still
Mm.
in a context that if their parents want them to be doing something that looks like work,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
looks like
yeah,
work.
yeah.
But it's quite fun. It's quick fire. It only has 5 or 6 questions per reading comprehension, and
Mm.
it covers the whole range of primary all the way up to the end of
Oh,
secondary
brilliant.
school. So
Mm.
it's a really easy way as a teacher, basically, to say, everyone do a read theory. You've got 10 minutes, and
Mm.
they do 2 or 3 quizzes, and then you can set it for homework. So I really like that one to
Yep.
increase quantity of reading, and it
Mm.
automatically sets the level pretty appropriately for the students.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Brilliant. I'll try to include that in the show notes. Thanks for that.
Mm.
Anything that you think teachers can do for their well-being, like to protect their own well-being?
I think assess how much of the work that you're giving students is actually beneficial if it's marked. Sometimes
Mm,
marking that we do because we think that we need to be marking, but is it actually going to help students if this has a teacher's tick on it as opposed to a student's tick on it,
mm,
or they've looked at it and marked it for themselves as homework? And I think for some things you need to mark it because the student won't have the right scale or the right approach to marking it. But multiple choice questions, teachers don't need to mark those. A lot of short answer questions often can still be marked by students or marked
yeah.
by a neighbor as well. And so, are there ways that you're over marking that are overburdening you as well? Would be a question that teachers can
So,
ask themselves.
such a great point. I'm just nodding ferociously away. Like, right. Do you have a funny or strange, scary, touching moment from your classroom in the past 4.5 years?
I think I'll pick up on touching. I think during my PGCE year, I was quite experimental, a bit
Mm,
unconventional. We did a lot with the class, which was not in the curriculum because they were quite a strong class as well. And
mm,
they I was really touched at the end of the year when I gave a feedback form out to my students just to hear how they had found the year. And
mm,
quite a few of them had written how English had been one of the subjects they didn't enjoy, even though they were good at it,
mm,
until joining my class that year. And
mm,
it
mm,
meant a lot to
mm.
me that it was effective. And also the things that I was trialing that I've already talked about earlier when talking about fun and language learning, the things that I tried in my PGCE year I basically had the precedent set for this works in this school context, and so I
Yeah,
can push this out to the rest of the school
yeah, yeah,
in taking up the department headship. So that was really touching and also motivating for me.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And so one last question is whether you have a question for me, given that I've asked you so many questions already.
I wonder whether you think teachers will always be necessary for teaching.
Oh, wow, that's a massive question. Yes, I would say so, absolutely. But I think you kind of touched on it before, the idea of knowledge transmission, whether we're the ones giving the knowledge or setting what knowledge they need to know. But I think teachers will always need to be there for the emotional support and just having someone there that you can trust to talk to outside of your family. I think that's really critical. Although saying that, I mean, I have seen kind of like life coach chatbots and counseling chatbots, which possibly might replace that. But yeah, I just feel that teachers are irreplaceable in the sense of
Mhm.
that, emotional, human aspect of things. So yes, I think they will absolutely still be necessary many years later.
Right.
Thanks for the question. My last question for you is simply kind of like looking back to when you first started, when you were like beginning your teaching journey, or just simply giving advice to a fresh graduate teacher. What kind of things would you say to that person, whether it's yourself or just a fresh graduate teacher? Yeah.
I think when I was a fresh grad, I would have found it helpful to have quite a specific list rather than you hear teachers talk about, oh, you should have classroom routines.
Mm,
And that's a wonderful phrase, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't have any examples. And
mm,
so
mm,
what just a list of tried and tested classroom routines that some
mm.
teachers have used in the past, I think would really help fresh grads because you go into a classroom with no specific tools, unless you
Yeah.
have a teaching qualification or something like that, in which case you
Mm,
probably do have a few tools. But that was for me when I went in without having done education before. It wasn't really until my PGCE year that I learnt a lot of these tools and went,
mm,
that's something that I can just start the year with, and it makes everything so much easier. Uh,
mm, mm,
Noisy classrooms are more distracting, and so try to make it quieter in the classroom, more light, keep students awake, open the curtains, that kind of
mm,
thing.
mm, mm,
They're
mm,
simple, but they're helpful, and they work in every lesson. And so I think a list of kind of almost tick boxes to do
mm,
before
mm.
starting a lesson would be really helpful to a lot of fresh grads.
Yeah, what you're saying just now reminds me of like learning to drive. You know how when you first get into the car, you have that sense of you have so many things that you need to do, but then over time it becomes automatic. I just think, yeah, you're
Mhm.
right. Like having that knowing all the things you need to check or all the things that you should be doing before you even
Mhm.
try to do anything else. That'll be super helpful. Yes, thank you so much, Robin, for all your sharing. And I must say, just listening to you talk about your lessons, I can imagine it must be like as a student, I would feel really lucky to be in your classroom that you would make the learning fun and enjoyable. And you, like, I think one thing that you kept going back to was the student's perspective. So it seems like the way you've moved your own teaching forward, but also your whole department forward, was to really think about, okay, what exactly do students need? Sure, we think about the exam. Sure, we need to prepare them for certain things that need for the exam, but you still really consider, okay, what would students think about this? Is this going to be something that's going to be different for them, a bit more enjoyable? And I must say, talking to so many different teachers around Hong Kong, like English often is one of the least enjoyable subjects for them, unfortunately. So I'm
Mm.
so glad that you're there, making a big impact on your students and also your school and your department too. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Alan. That's very kind of you to say.
So thank you for coming on the podcast again. That conversation with Robin was so energizing. He talked about how to make lessons more fun and enjoyable by arranging authentic activities for students, like school trips or projects, where there are clear outcomes but autonomy for students to choose how to achieve them. If making your classroom fun seems a bit of a reach, perhaps you could consider small tweaks to existing practices to make it feel a bit different, like the unseen dictation that Robin talked about. Or perhaps you need to consider what you can remove to make things less dry. I hope you enjoyed listening to Robin's extraordinary story, and please do join us again next time on Ordinary Teachers and Students.